Welcome to Chasing a Murderer. I also run Talking News. My name is Debbie, and I want to ask you guys to do me a favor. On our channel, we need your support, so push like and subscribe right now so you don't forget. If you would like notifications whenever we have new uploads on stories, you can hit that little bell that you see up in the corner. So right now, we are on Connecting the Dots Part 2. It's been a while to get this out, and what we're going to do is actually I'm going to give you a recap real quick in case you haven't caught part 1. And this is on the Lori Vallow case. There are still many people out there that are confused by this varied story. I made a promise to do the map, so here we go. So Lori Vallow, she married straight out of high school, totaling 5 marriages in her lifetime. But we're only going to show the last 3 marriages in her life. Devout Mormon. She's a mother of 3. She has 2 biological children and 1 that she adopted. Lori's 3rd marriage was with a man by the name of Joseph Ryan. He was a successful businessman, and together they had this beautiful little angel here, Tylee Ryan. She's one of the missing kids in this story. When you hear about Lori Vallow's brother Alex Cox tasing and threatening Lori Vallow's husbands, one of them is Joseph Ryan. He's the one that passed away with a heart attack. Lori's 4th husband, Charles Vallow, a devout Catholic until he meets Lori Vallow. He converts to Mormon. He's a successful businessman as well. His life is about living to please his wife, Lori. That's what people say that know the couple. Together, he and Lori adopt this cute little bugger here, JJ Vallow. People are confused where JJ come from. So, this is Charles Vallow's sister, Kay Woodcock. And JJ is her grandson. For reasons unknown, Kay wasn't able to take care of him, so Charles and Lori adopt JJ. And they raised JJ up until the time he went missing and Charles passes away. Below Lori Vallow is Colby Ryan. Although he shares the same last name as Lori Vallow's 3rd husband, Joseph Ryan, Colby is not Joseph Ryan's biological father. Rumors say that he adopted Colby. To the right is Alex Cox. Alex Cox, the brother of Lori Vallow, is one of her siblings out of the many siblings the family has. They were raised in a family of Mormons. Now, when you hear his name, Alex Cox, you'll notice that his name is attached to many of the odd events happening with Lori's husband and children. So he has actually tased Lori's 3rd husband, Joseph Ryan. Spent 90 days in jail, and then he was the one that shot Charles Vallow, Lori Vallow's 4th husband, claiming self-defense. Beside him on the right is his niece, Melanie Boudreau. That's also Lori's niece. Her mother was Stacy Cox, who you will hear mentioned died of sometimes suspicious reasons, but overall, it was diabetic shock. So Melanie Boudreau married Brandon Boudreau and was married to him for years, when suddenly, after hanging out with her Aunt Lori and her new group, she suddenly demands a divorce. And Brandon Boudreau goes through quite a bit, and you'll hear in this video as well what happens to him. After Brandon Boudreau, Melanie suddenly marries a man she meets online by the name of Ian Pulaski. Melanie hardly knows the guy, and he hardly knows her, and we'll hear more about this as well as we get it deeper into the video. This guy right here, Chad Debell. He's a doomsday author, and he's also quite a manipulator. Chad Debell is married to this woman, and you will hear her name quite often for, off and on, Tammy Debell. Tammy Debell, they have 5 children together. They're Mormons. According to the community, Tammy Debell is like the greatest thing. She's just a sweet, sweet girl. So it's really important that you know the connection between Chad and his wife, Tammy Debell, because they're married. Chad and Lori are not together at this part of the story. They are having an affair. Where we're continuing here, Lori Brothers just shot her husband, Charles Vallow, in self-defense, he claims. And then finally, Melanie Gibb. Melanie Gibb and a few people involved with preparing the people where Chad Debell speaks at events. They talk about end times. They talk about visions they have for the future. They have, they talk about their many lives that they've had, probation, and even zombie body takeovers. So it's confusing. You have two Melanies in a story. You have Melanie Boudreau, that is Lori Vallow's niece. And then you have Melanie Gibb, that is a friend of Lori's that she met through preparing the people. And let's start with a recap, and then we'll move on in our story. So in July, Charles Vallow was shot by Lori Vallow's brother, Alex Cox, in a strange altercation. Lori's brother claims that he did it in self-defense. Strangely, just prior to this event or incident, Lori had visions of her husband passing away. Stranger still, Chad Debell, her lover, also had visions of his wife passing away right after Charles. Lori Vallow had actually talked to a few people in her little group about those visions, and Melanie Gibb shared it on an interview with Nate Eaton. So according to family members and records, before odd things started and things got out of hand. Now, according to a few court records filed in Maricopa County Superior Court, they show that Tylee lived in Chandler as far back as June 2012 when she was just 9 years old. And her little brother, J.J. Vallow, was adopted back in 2014 by Lori and her then husband, Charles Vallow. But now Charles is gone, and Lori is trying to raise the two children alone. Her older child, Colby Ryan, had actually moved out and started his own family. And this is after she had told Charles on multiple occasions that she actually didn't care about her own children any longer. According to family and friends, Lori was just a normal wife and a normal mother until she met a man, a doomsday author, a devout Mormon. His name is Chad Debell. Chad claims to speak to spirits who advise him from behind the veil, as well as having visits from dead or deceased relatives. He's a visionary, and he believes that he's like a prophet or God. It seemed women that Chad was interested in, he was telling them that he was once married to them in a past life, and that they were both great leaders in those past lives. In fact, he had just recently told Lori Vallow that she was once married to him in a past life, and that he was once living as a man called Melanie, which was one of the prophets or angels in the stories in the Mormon religion. Not many people knew about this, but one man was actually quite confident. He understood what Lori was learning, teaching, and living that come from this man called Chad Debell. Charles pleaded to everyone that his wife needed mental help, and these are in court documents that he left behind after his passing. They tell of a concerning story that Lori threatened him, telling him that she was a god preparing for Christ's second coming in July of 2020. And she even threatened Charles if he got in her way that she would murder him. At one point, Charles had to get an order of protection against Lori, but it wasn't long, and he wasn't able to, keep his distance away from the woman he loved. He continued to try to repair the marriage, even when Lori told him if something happened to him, that no one would ever care. Here's a video clip of Lori smiling, talking to the police officer right after that event where her husband was shot by her brother.
Does your husband live here or no?
No, he's in Houston.
Gotcha.
We just moved in here.
Gotcha. How long have you guys lived there?
sorry?
How long have you lived here?
Like 3 weeks.
Oh, geez. Yeah, okay.
That's why the neighbors took us.
Gotcha.
Like, hi neighbor, sorry.
Are you working at all?
It's very hard to imagine and see this woman smiling after such a horrific event. And then even worse, watching her daughter, seeing that she's not comfortable. She feels insecure. So Charles did try to warn people about this. He has documents that also show that he was trying to get help for Lori. She refused because they would discover she was a translated being, something also taught by Chad Debell. So she shows no empathy, once again, for another loss that happens in her family. People are starting to notice that fact, and they do not let it go like usual. People are starting to follow those breadcrumbs Charles left behind. Just 2 days after Charles passes away, Lori takes $6,000 out of the checking account, and about 3 days after that, she takes another $3,000, totaling $9,000. Lori texts Kay Woodcock, Charles' sister, and says, "Hey, KK, did you take $3,000 out?" Kay tells her, "No, I did not." Tells about this incident in an interview. I just can't remember which one it is right now. And she said that Lori got that money. She knows she got that money, but it was odd that she went that route with it. It was like she was pretending she didn't take it. If she did take it, it shows what extreme Lori will go to look the way she wants people to see her. Somehow, Lori didn't have a job, but was paying bills for several people in her life. But Kay never mentioned who they were. It's July 12th of 2019, just a few days after Charles' passing, and Lori Vallow texts her stepsons around 4:30 p.m., approximately 20 hours after Charles Vallow has passed away. This is concerning to Cheryl, the mother of the boys, the way that she gave them the news. She texts them and says, "Hi boys, I have some sad news. Your dad passed away yesterday. I'm working on making arrangements, and I'll try to keep you informed with what's going on. I'm still not sure how to handle things. I just want you to know that I love you, and so did your dad." The problem with that is she never tells the boys what happened to their dad. And when one of the sons asked her what happened, she answered, "We're still waiting for the ME report." Charles' son continues to ask a series of questions. He just wants to know what happened to his father, but no response. At 6:54 p.m., he asks again he's getting frustrated and angered. And by 8:20 p.m. that evening, he texts again. Lori finally replies something, and she says she's still waiting on the ME. And she still hasn't told them that he was shot by her own brother. The ex-wife of Charles Vallow, Cheryl, says that she Googles to find out more information, and she discovers from the news, the Chandler, Arizona news, that Alex Cox had actually shot her ex-husband. July 13th, 2019, Lori sends another text to Charles' son after a couple promptings in the late afternoon. It just says, "I'm still waiting and working on arrangements and sorting things out the best I can." But Charles' son doesn't believe a word that she has to say, and he asks her, he says, "Why don't you just tell us what happened to him?" What Lori fails to realize is Cheryl's able to look up why Charles passed away and that it was marked a homicide. So July 15th, Lori calls Charles' life insurance company. She had actually tried to access the life insurance policy the day after he passed away. She calls Charles' life insurance company, and Lori was denied access to the information, and they just refuse to let her know anything about that account. She found out that she was no longer Charles Vallow's beneficiary. And even more shocking to her, she found out she would not be receiving any money. This absolutely enraged Lori, according to a few witnesses, and it ended up causing a little bit of argument between her and Charles' sister Kay Woodcock later. And what Lori failed to understand was Charles Vallow was in very close contact with his sister Kay, and he was sharing everything that he was going through in that relationship with Lori, including the time he called Lori trying to change the passwords to his life insurance policy, which equaled up to $1 million. Also on July 15th, Charles' sons are still reaching out to Lori Vallow. At this point, it had been 3 days, and they still hadn't had any answers from her anyways on how their dad passed away. And they write her saying things like, quote, "The only information we have is that one text from you saying that he passed away. You disappeared after that. We need any information that you have. What happened? When did it happen? How did it happen?" Clearly, he is completely upset. And according to Lori Vallow's friend at this time, Melanie Gibbs says that she's not hearing from Lori that much after Charles passes away. In fact, she didn't even know Charles passed away until 4 days afterwards. Most of the rest of the month in July, it's nothing but drama and Lori trying to avoid the reality of what's really happening, especially with Charles' sons. She has plenty of time to talk with Chad Debell, but has little time to talk to the kids who are deeply hurt by what happened in that house that day. July 20th, Charles' son Steve texted Lori, says, quote, "If you won't answer those questions, can we please have his watches and other stuff he always talked about he had around?" End quote. Lori responded about an hour later and told Charles' son that she would send some items to his house. According to him, that was the last communication he ever had with his stepmother. At this point, all Steve wanted was something to remember his father by, and he said, quote, "My dad had a collection of watches, very fancy watches. He wore nice watches for years and years, so I thought she was going to send me some of them," end quote. A short period later, a box or package arrives to their home. He said, quote, "The package arrived and inside were 2 cheap Timex watches you'd find at CVS. Anything that was worth money, we didn't get. I'm assuming she sold everything else," end quote. But that wasn't the only problem the family was suffering with. They were trying to figure out if there was a funeral and where the funeral was going to be, what time. They also wanted to know where the father is being held. According to Steve, Lori refused to tell them where Charles' body was or if the funeral was even planned. Steve and his brother eventually figured out which funeral home his dad was in, and they walked inside to speak to the funeral director. When they approached the director, he seemed nervous and shaky. They asked the director if there was any information that they could give him, and he said he was instructed not to tell anybody anything. The sad part about this is the boys were in Charles and Lori's life for 13 years. And in those 13 years, he said that he only felt like, him and his stepmother were more like acquaintances than family. Looking back on some of the articles, he speaks about the family and relationships and such. It seems that he kind of feels like, this family's kind of strange and their relationship is just very strange. He even mentioned that, quote, "She can put on a smile and she'll make you believe everything is okay. I'm surprised that she can pretend that things are just fine and dandy. I thought it was very incredibly insulting. It is ridiculous that she is pretending that nothing happened," end quote. He was basically saying that he felt like she was above the law, something that is mentioned many times throughout this case. Now, what was very shocking, not only the fact all these other things that she has going on after Charles passed. She is now taking something that's important to JJ, his service dog, and put it up for sale. And that's probably one of your biggest no-nos that you do. You can't put a service dog that you get from someone that trains them up for sale. The trainer of the dog finds out that she's selling it and tells her that she can't do that. And they take JJ's dog back and they give it to another family that would need them. But it didn't make sense to a lot of people why she had taken something that was so incredibly important to JJ away from him. Again, another questionable act of how she feels and how she empathizes with those around her. You'll notice pretty shortly there will be emails that act and persuade people that she does have empathy. But she's doing something completely different behind closed doors. According to Charles' ex-wife, Cheryl, she mentions that there really wasn't a funeral. There was nothing but a bunch of people putting a memorial together, but as you know, we're not really certain how that went. One thing we are certain about is Cade Woodcock showed up to that memorial or funeral, whatever it was, along with Charles' sons and a few other people. But there were people that didn't show up, and those were one of the most important people that should have been there. Lori Vallow and JJ. Neither one of them showed up to the memorial. And this is after Kay Woodcock pleaded with Lori to let JJ come. Again, a lack of empathy, just lack of caring for others. Meanwhile, people who know Charles Vallow very well are starting to realize that this is most likely something that must have been planned. This is not something that Charles brought on himself. He was not a violent man, and he was trying his best to work around the aggressive or the violence or arguments. Even when Lori took $35,000 out of his business account, and he couldn't pay his employees and he got sued. Even when she changed his flight ticket and took his truck and left his house empty. What's the biggest slap in the face is near the end of July, Lori Vallow tells JJ School that Charles Vallow committed suicide. And she also is wanting to get rid of JJ's dog. And we'll hear more about this shortly. Late in July, Lori Vallow allegedly texted Charles Vallow's sister, Kate Woodcock. She was angry about the $1 million going to Kay and not to Lori. The email was in something to the effect of, quote, 5 kids, no money, and his sister gets everything, end quote. Somewhere, and we don't know the exact date, Lori and Chad Debell decide that they will go to the temple where they will marry themselves using a priest behind the veil. That's meaning a spirit on the other side, affirming that Chad and Lori both think that they're above the Mormon leaders. Now, I want to mention that when the dog that belonged to JJ was taken, the dates vary. So it's somewhere in this time frame. JJ's he's lost his father, he's lost his dog. His mother's not really being that great of a mother to him, but no one really knows what Tylee's going through, and that I find that disturbing. Around August 5th, we're hearing that Lori enrolls JJ into school. He had already been going to summer school, but now the regular school year was starting. August 6th, Tylee's Venmo account is pretty active, and they send Colby Ryan money. According to Colby, he says his mother's not very technology knowledgeable, and that she would oftentimes have Tylee send money through her Venmo. August 10th, a very significant date, Kay Woodcock and Larry Woodcock, the grandparents of JJ, finally get a hold of their grandson. They get to talk to him for about 35 seconds. According to Kay, it appeared that when JJ was talking to them, it was like someone was standing beside him telling him what to do or say. So this was a 35-second FaceTime conversation. They said that usually JJ would call them back, but that didn't happen. Around this time, Lori Vallow is considering moving away from the area. According to Melanie Gibb, Lori has been talking with Chad Debell about where she's supposed to be. According to Chad, he's getting these revelations from the other side of the veil that are saying that Lori is supposed to be in Idaho by a certain time. Lori explains to Melanie that she needs to go to the temple I don't know if it's the temple, I'm sorry guys, or the portal to get her own answers. At some point, Lori does seek revelation, and she's told that yes, she's supposed to be in Idaho and at a certain time. And it's at that point that she agrees that she's going to take her family and go root themselves in Idaho beside her lover. At that time, Tammy Debell, Chad Debell's wife, is still alive and well. According to Melanie Gibb, Lori wasn't very comfortable with the fact that she was moving up to be with this man that was still with his wife. But not too long ago, they had visions that both Charles and Tammy both would die in two different ways. Lori expected that Tammy would pass away in a car accident before she arrived in Idaho. Sometime around mid-August, Cade Woodcock and Larry Woodcock are calling JJ's school to check on them because they haven't heard from him in a while and they couldn't get in contact with him either. Their grandson is a very important person in their lives, and they know that Charles Vallows had some very significant concerns for his safety before he left this earth. Around this time, Chad is attending a few conferences. So on August 22nd of 2019, Melanie and Lori are on a podcast, a new show that they're starting up called Feel the Fire, episode Seeking Sweet Jesus. Around August 30th, Colby says he FaceTimed Tylee for the last time. So here's another date where they say they picked up JJ's dog, and I believe this one is probably the most accurate. So JJ's dog is finally given up. So Lori has got the car packed. She's preparing to move. According to the guy that's picking up the dog, Lori Vallow had her SUV in the middle of the driveway. They were in the middle of moving. He noticed that JJ was in the back seat on his tablet, but he claims he never seen Tylee that day. When Lori brought the dog out, she asked if they had found a new home for him yet. Then she also tells him, well, if Tylee asks, just tell her you have found a new family, because she really is upset about all this. So there's another clue that Tylee Ryan is understanding that what her mother is doing is strange. It doesn't make sense, and it's hurtful. So according to some other sources, what they believe happened was Lori actually called him and said, look, we're moving right now. You need to come get the dog this moment. So shortly after that, Lori, Tylee, and JJ drive up to Colby's workplace. That's her older son, in Tylee's Jeep. Colby comes out to talk to them briefly, and they tell him that they are moving the next day. Colby says he hugged them goodbye, but he understood that why they were leaving, but he said at the time he didn't know that they were leaving, that they had plans for moving, but he thought it was a good idea that Lori get the kids out of the house where that horrible incident happened to her husband. According to Colby, Lori told her son that she had a new job, but did not mention where the job was or what she was doing. Colby said that Tylee seemed to be very sad and wasn't very excited about moving. In fact, Tylee didn't even say very much. So the family is on its way to Idaho. Lori's trying to be closer to Chad. She's claiming she has a new job, and I think we all pretty much assume or allege that it's probably to do with the podcast. But something we did learn later about this is Tylee, Lori's daughter, originally planned to stay in Arizona and move in with her friend, but there may be a different reason as to why it happened like it did, and we'll hear shortly. Around this time as well, Lori's landlord, Joe Pongratz, posted on Facebook. Following Charles' shooting, he had asked Lori to move her family out of the house. Now remember, Melanie Boudreau, who is Lori Vallow's niece, was once married to Brandon Boudreau, but after hanging out with Lori's new group, their religious group, Melanie suddenly asked Brandon for a divorce. Brandon began to have concerns about this religious group, and he had been speaking with Charles, and because Charles also had concerns about this group. Now, coincidental or not, Brandon says allegedly Melanie was showing less interest in her own immediate family and was making a bigger connection with Lori and the religious group. This is the same exact thing that Charles has been trying to tell people he's been going through. When Lori arrives in Idaho, neighbors immediately take notice of this family. They notice that there's a girl and a young boy with the mother. The family move into townhomes at 565 Pioneer Road, and they move into the unit 175. Approximately for the first week, Lori's brother, Alex Cox, is living with them. And after that, he rents a townhome not too far away in unit 107. The family begins to settle in to their new town in Rexburg, Idaho, which is not that far from Chad Debell and his wife, Tammy. Chad Debell's wife, Tammy Debell, is a community leader, a local librarian, a mother, a wife, a very exceptional person, and somebody that is very adored. But she is unaware of what's brewing behind her back in her family. It seems that Chad, her husband, has swayed away from the family as well. Now, September 3rd approaches. The next step for somebody that moves into a new area is to enroll your children into the local school. Get to know the area and the people around you. Tylee, who already had her GED, was okay, but she had JJ to worry about. But meanwhile, Lori is actually in communication with her brother Alex Cox and a few others, and they're setting up a podcast in between all of this. If you're new here, guys, I switch environments, so it skews the different sound. So finally, Lori has enrolled her son JJ into Kennedy Elementary School, and that's according to documents, and the principal goes by Josh. But Lori's main focus is not JJ or Tylee. It's focused and geared somewhere else. Her focus is on gathering people for this new group that she's involved with, as well as for podcasts that they have and things like that. Their priorities are definitely set toward and geared toward the firstborn. Lori now considers herself to be this great gatherer and leader of the 144,000 that they are collecting for the firstborn. September 8th. Lori, her brother Alex Cox, her daughter Tylee, and her son JJ all go to Yellowstone as a family trip. From information gathered from Lori Vallow's iCloud account on her phone, it appears that this family is just having that picture-perfect moment. But later, records would indicate this would be the last time that her daughter Tylee was seen. There are two photographs that we are aware of that investigators collected. One being at the entrance of the Yellowstone Park, and the other from Lori's iCloud account. New information released June 2020 show us through Alex Cox's GPS and phone records in the month of September what might have happened. According to Alex's phone records at 6:40 that evening, September 8th, it tracks Alex Cox to the west gate of Yellowstone. It also appears that he's at Buckaroo's Barbecue Grill before leaving shortly after that. He then arrives at Rexburg approximately around 8:37 that evening. Around 9:35 that night, the phone pings in Lori's apartment, Unit 175. A little bit later, around 9:43 until 9:53, they believe that Alex Cox is at the Maverick convenience store. Investigators track his phone at 11:44 at his townhome unit, which is 107, the same complex as his sister. Very early the next morning, September 9th at 12 a.m., it appears that Alex is in his unit still before finally leaving once again. It's really early in the morning, 2 a.m. in fact. Alex goes back to Lori's unit, Unit 175. He is there approximately an hour until 3:37 a.m. At 4:37 a.m., Alex is back at his unit. He stays there until around 8:59 that morning. At that point, he leaves his house again, drives to a familiar property at 202 North 1900 East Rexburg. That's where Chad Debell lives, his sister's lover and doomsday author. 9:21 that morning, Alex Cox's phone says that he's on Chad Debell's property and standing in the area of Chad's barn. According to the GPS information, he's standing on the east side of that barn. The information collected says that Alex Cox stayed on that property for about 2.5 hours before finally leaving around noon. In between that time, around 10:39 till around 11:39, on Chad Debell's property before heading to a restaurant called Del Taco. Ironically, 11:53 that morning, Chad Debell texts his wife Tammy Debell. It reads, "Well, I had an interesting morning. I thought I should burn all the limb debris by the fire pit before the limbs got too soaked from the coming storms. While I did so, I spotted a raccoon along the fence. I hurried and got my gun, and he was still walking along. I got close enough that one shot did the trick. He is now in our pet cemetery. Fun times," he says with an exclamation point. 11:56, Chad texts his wife Tammy once again. He says, "Gonna shower now, then go write a while at BYU. Love you." Now keep in mind that Chad Debell is at BYU at this time. Also, at 2:47, Tammy texts Chad back and says, "Good for you." And a short while later, at 2:48, Chad texts Tammy and says, "I'm back home now." Investigators later were able to pinpoint where these texts were coming from, and they were coming from the same area that Alex Cox was in that day, that morning, and that afternoon. And it was also in the same area that investigators found out that Chad was having bonfires. According to neighbors nearby Chad, they did hear a gunshot that day. A lot of people wonder if this is connected to Tightly Ryan. This is because Alex Cox was at his apartment around 4 after leaving Lori's and then headed to Chad's property that morning. He arrived there in between 9 and 10. Now, a lot of people and investigators find a lot of evidence that leads them to believe that Alex Cox does have something to do with the people whose lives were lost and those who were missing. Now, this timeline is important, and that's when did Alex Cox use these beliefs as a reason to murder. Reflecting back to 2007, we realized that Alex Cox had indeed threatened the life of Lori's third husband, Joseph Ryan, and actually attacked him with a taser gun. This is way before Chad Debell comes along. But people believe that Alex Cox is being swayed by this belief system. So Alex Cox was getting deeper into the teachings of Chad and Lori, especially around this point. Reading many of the comments that you guys leave, especially on the topic of the relationship between Alex Cox and Lori Debell, some of you suspect that that relationship between those two are very odd and might go deeper than brother and sister. Well, there's no proof of that. There's definitely proof that they do have a very strong bond. And it also appeared that Lori was able to control every aspect of Alex Cox's life, including in the near future who Alex Cox marries. Lori and her brother Alex have been witnessed arguing in the middle of the street, where she tells Alex that he is not being loyal enough to the family. And again, we need to recognize Alex Cox is connected to everybody, almost every single person that has disappeared or something's happened to them. And one of the questions is, was Lori believing in what she's believing in now before she met Chad or afterwards? And how does Alex belief system roll into this? Well, referring to old documents, there's nothing mentioned about zombies or Jesus Christ coming until later on. So what was the different reasons as to why he was doing it? Whether it was because they were zombies or a threat to the mission of the 144,000 or being the main woman in Chad Daybell's life. If we reflect back to Alex Cox back in 2007, Lori's third husband, Joseph Ryan, we didn't hear anything about Lori having these sort of beliefs at that time. We didn't hear any mentions of zombies in the documents. Yet, Alex Cox had attacked Joseph Ryan with a taser gun, attempting to take his life. So whether or not Lori had these beliefs before she meets Chad is quite interesting. Was this the start of her believing that she was above others, or was she just manipulating? The truth of the matter is this. When Lori met Chad, things began to go crazy. At this point, Chad and Lori are living way outside of the teachings deemed acceptable by the Mormon clergy. Yet, they were able to continue to seek the temple through secrecy and deception and lies. Lori and Chad were not only deceitful to their own family and friends, they were deceitful to the entire Mormon community. Now, Lori and Chad like to use their charisma, their persuasion, in order to control people. And so Lori claimed to these people, as well as Chad, that they knew each other in previous lives. Chad Daybell takes time to create a list, and this list entails their friends and family and their connection to past lives like prophets and even Hollywood movie stars. There were different levels that this Church of the Firstborn were shooting for. And so once they hit one level, then they would be promoted to the next level based on their loyalty and belief system. But it's disguised as how brainwashed you are. Melanie Gibbs said in an interview that she thought these teachings were unusual at the beginning, but made her feel chosen and special in this mission. According to Melanie, she made it seem as if she would doubt herself, and then Lori would tell her, no, you are this. You can do this. And if you can imagine, if you have someone sitting there leading you on, telling you, you are this great person, you're capable of doing anything you set your mind to, you're going to look at them a little bit deeper. And that's exactly what Melanie Gibbs says she does. It's not like when she's speaking to Melanie Gibbs, she's talking about hurting people or anything like this that we are aware of. But according to Melanie Gibbs, she's just being a person of support and trying to make her believe that she is a leader, one of the leaders of this new 144,000 Church of the Firstborn. It appears when Lori moves in September, to the Rexburg area, It's not just her and her family. She has moved her brother there. And shortly afterwards, she'll move more family. And then other friends are planning as well to come to the area. So it's like a gathering. People are actually referring to Lori as the gatherer at this point. Not only that, in this timeline, and this can span from months before or months after when I share this kind of information, Chad makes a portal in Lori's closet so that she can visit him whenever she wants. According to Melanie Gibb, they are connecting spiritually in these portals. And the belief system only gets stranger because we find out that Chad was actually using a pendulum to get answers oftentimes, which is definitely not a Mormon teaching. And the people involved with this group, I'm going to name a few for you. Zuluma, Alex, Melanie Gibb, Melanie Boudreau, Chad, Warwick, Mal, Salsa, Stokes, and trust me, there's a lot more. And this time, Lori is talking to Melanie Boudreau. She's encouraging her to come up and check out Idaho. But if you watch Melanie's interviews, she lies a lot. That's my opinion, but comparing all the information, she's the biggest liar of them all. On September 16th of 2019, and this is posted on September 16th, Chad and Lori do a podcast along with their friend Melanie Gibb called 3 Field of Fire, Sharing Sweet Jesus' Love. This was actually, according to their detail on this, it was something that they recorded during spring and summer break. Around the same time that you will hear Lori gives her daughter Tylee a title. So this podcast would be about the time Lori really starts giving people the name zombie. It's September 18th of 2019, and Melanie Gibb and her boyfriend prepare to drive to Idaho. She talks to Lori on the phone first, and she hears Lori complaining that JJ is a zombie, which means, what is the definition of a zombie? The original mortal spirit, or the owner or host, has left the body, and an unclean or dark spirit has now taken over that host. According to Melanie Gibb, this spirit is always a dark spirit, and Melanie is very confident and understands what a zombie is. She said when a dark spirit enters the host or one's body, that sends the original spirit into limbo. In that interview, according to Melanie Gibb, this information actually come from Lori after one day she hears Lori talking to Chad on one of her 3 phones. Chad tells Lori that Charles Vallow, her husband, is a zombie, an unclean dark spirit called Nick Snyder. Nick Snyder has now taken over the body of Charles. And remember, guys, a short time after this, Charles is shot. Lori was in this house when it happened, and a lot of people suspect the kids were as well. When Melanie Gibb actually drives up there the next day, it's really unclear as to why she's going up there. She doesn't really clear that up, but we do know that she does a podcast with them. We know that she talks to Lori about JJ being a zombie, and we know that they hang out at one of the colleges there. We also know that Lori said, as part of her and Chad's religious beliefs, their mission was to, quote, rid the world of zombies, end quote. Melanie Gibb on September 19th through September 23rd visits Lori in Idaho with her boyfriend Warwick. It's a day after talking to Lori on the phone about JJ being a zombie, and once she gets up there, she's not alone. There's Lori, Chad, Alex Cox, and allegedly Melanie Boudreau might have been there. It's worth mentioning, at least, to look into it deeper. Gibbs stayed at the Unit 175 with her friend Lori. And Gibbs says it was really odd because the entire time that she was there, Lori never speaks about Tylee, never even mentions her. Gibb also says that she noticed that she didn't see Tylee, so it was kind of strange. At some point, Melanie is sitting in the living room of Lori's home, and she sees Lori pointing out behaviors that JJ had. Lori said, "Look at how he's doing this," or "Look at how he's doing that." Then tells Gibb that JJ just loves Satan. She's also making over JJ's vocabulary and how they're getting bigger, suggesting that this was a clear sign he was now, too, a zombie. But what we're not clear about is, where did Lori get those ideas? Melanie said in an interview she just kept looking at JJ thinking, "I don't know. He just looks like JJ." But Lori just continues to point out, everything that she notices that JJ's doing that compares to a zombie, trying to convince Melanie to agree. Melanie Gibbs sat there and she thought silently in her head that he just looks like JJ to me. She says, hyper and angry one minute, chill and cry the next minute. That's just how his behavior's always been. Lori just continues to try to get Melanie to see the zombie in JJ, but Melanie Gibbs just doesn't see it. The same thing Melanie said on that interview with Nate was also on a probable cause affidavit. On a probable cause affidavit, there's something that we hadn't heard of priorly. And Lori was talking to Melanie Gibb on the phone in the spring. And she told Lori one day that she heard Lori call Tylee a zombie because she no longer wanted to babysit her brother JJ. And Melanie Gibbs says she heard Tylee respond and say, quote, "Not me, Mom," end quote. In fact, Lori told Gibb multiple times that Tylee was a zombie. This is interesting because the term zombie, it seemed to be used far more often within their group than originally we were told. Lori told Gibb she noticed Tylee was a zombie at the ages 12 or 13. And that's when Tylee began to become difficult for Lori to handle. Not certain if we take what Melanie Gibbs said out of context or not, but she mentions that Lori hadn't really used the term zombie until she heard her talking to Chad on the phone the day she heard Chad call Charles a zombie. So this thing that's roaming the earth and now has taken over somebody's body. It's an unclean spirit. And Lori didn't know the term until Charles. But we're hearing Tylee was called a zombie back in the spring. Lori and Chad, it was clear that they had a war against the world's zombies. In fact, Chad would sit in his portal and he would use prayer, according to Melanie Gibb in an interview, to pray that these zombies would be deemed no longer. And this is because that was the only way to release the spirit from its host, and that was in death. See, this kind of throws a red flag for me. So according to Melanie Gibb, Lori was actually blown out by the idea of this zombie thing at first and told Melanie, "Wow, that's just really different." And Melanie said she agreed with her. Perhaps, maybe they're mistaken and Charles was called a zombie before Tylee? It doesn't seem so. The timeline doesn't seem to go there. After the first day of taking in this supposedly new concept, Lori seemed to be accepting of this zombie idea, but something seems very off, and that something is truth. See, it's not that Mormons are not, some Mormons anyways, are not familiar with the word zombie. In fact, they have mentioned the word zombie multiple times if you really look deep into the articles and blogs that are out there. There's even a game that was created by a Mormon, and that game was supported by some of the biggest Mormons in religion. And one of those people is Christopher Crow, an English professor professor, sorry guys, at BYU. This professor specializes in adolescent literature, also hopes this game will reach out to non-Mormon audiences. But does this zombie game fit the same meaning as Chad and Lori? I'm really kind of uncertain, because it just seems like Lori and Chad have taken this zombie in their culture or belief system and kind of added some fuel to it. So, but I'm going to let you see the introduction to this game. I think it was created back in 2014, and see what you think for yourself.
Nearly a year ago, a mysterious pandemic broke loose. Scientists scrambled to find the culprit and discovered that the world's food supply was tainted. But it was too late to stop the infested crops, which had traveled to every population of the world. Millions died, and, worse yet, even more transitioned to the undead. Madness swept the nations. Brave souls banded together to fight the zombie legions with courage and strength. What hope now remains? Can the human race be saved from utter extinction? But who is this? Why, it's the Mormons. While the outside world went to heck, a year's supply of food storage has allowed these Mormons to press on. But now, as their own clean food supply has dwindled, the stalwart saints are making the trek to Zion to mix and mingle at the ultimate ward potluck. Armed with weapons honed from personal purity, righteousness, and ingenuity, the Mormons are ready and prepared to replenish the earth.
So, it seems zombies is a term that a very intellectual Mormon might already know. So, was Lori very surprised by this terminology, or how Chad was using this definition of what a zombie is? Maybe this new idea, they were more exciting for a woman who felt alone in her beliefs and for such a long time. Perhaps she learned all this information from those books of Chad's and books written in Preparing the People group. So it didn't matter. Lori seemed to be seeking someone who was just religiously aggressive as she was. And Chad seemed to make her ideas, dreams that she was afraid to explore, just burst from the zipper of years of suppression. Melanie Gibb didn't really give an exact timeline of who was called a zombie and when. We do know that Lori had given the title zombie to someone else in the spring, and it was her own daughter, Tylee. And we know that Charles Vallow was given the name zombie 2 months prior to his death. And Melanie plays like this is something new to them, but when Melanie just seems to be very comfortable with that term, she's even asked Lori, why is everyone in your life turning into zombies? Though I must admit, we're not certain what context she's using that in. It just appears that there's a possibility that this term is used fluently. It at least tells you that there's a clear sign that Melanie Gibb once agreed that people in Lori's life were indeed zombies. Perhaps was it not only coming from Chad, and we don't know, but it's a question we should ask. Now, furthermore, maybe Melanie Gibb was scared to say that she used that word often for fear she might be plain, but I always say, truth will always set you free. So a lot of people are wondering if Melanie Gibb is telling the truth, or maybe the timelines were getting mixed up. I never understood why media investigators don't use more dates. Definitely, dates can crack open any case. crack it wide open if you're meticulous and well aware. I'm not sure there's a reason they're not using dates, but it would be nice if they did. Now remember, Melanie has a whole lot of faith in Chad Daybell's visionary gifts at the time and his ability to see spirits on the other side, he claims, 24/7. She absolutely says that she believed in that Chad could walk these two worlds and accepted that he might be more gifted than most, but later she would come to feel completely different. Now, during Melanie Gibbs' visit there, she's there, like I mentioned earlier, the 19th through the 22nd, Monday through Thursday, and somewhere in that time frame, Chad, Lori, Melanie Gibb all go to BYU, where they walk the halls and admire the art and pictures. And at times, Lori and Chad walked track. Melanie describes that the three of them walked and they talked. According to Gibb, they were learning a little bit of the history of the college. Neither JJ or Tylee were there. Now, there's some belief that there's a possibility Melanie Boudreau might be there during this time, or perhaps it was another time. But in an interview Melanie Boudreau does, she claims that she was at BYU touring the college with a group of people. Tammy Debell, as far as we know, was oblivious to all what was going on. In this time frame, she's still on this earth, and she still believes that her and Chad are bound by marriage. But wait a minute, Chad and Lori are bound by marriage in the temple. They married themselves. So he's now married to two women at once. Okay, so getting back to the fact that they're touring BYU. Melanie Gibb is there. Supposedly, she's there alone. Her boyfriend's not there, neither is Melanie Boudreau. It's just the three of them. It seems at that time that Melanie Gibb is a great supporter of whatever Chad and Lori are doing. She understands that they are the leader of the firstborn and that they have a greater mission. So much so that she goes against the very commandments and rules of morals and values. Melanie Gibb, the friend of Chad Daybell and Tammy Daybell, a fellow Mormon, is at this college witnessing Chad and Lori commit adultery. Melanie Gibb asked them and said, "Aren't you worried about people might see you?" She says Lori responds, "Well, Tammy doesn't come out a lot or to this part a lot, so." Melanie said that a lot of people knew Chad didn't know who Tammy was and what she looked like. But here they are, people who are for Jesus, love, loyalty, faith. They're exhibiting and displaying actions that go completely against those teachings. As they continue to walk and talk and be openly affectionate with one another, Melanie, during her visit there, that Chad was pretty reserved and that Lori did most of the talking, suggesting that Chad gets uncomfortable, he gets quiet. There's one thing that she learned about Chad during her time with him, and is sometimes he comes across not so confident, but she doesn't clarify why. According to Melanie Gibb, she hasn't seen Tylee at all, and Alex Cox is babysitting JJ. Ironically, Tylee should be attending BYU, according to Lori. Melanie Gibb admits at the time she did have questions whether or not Tylee was in college because things just didn't add up correctly. But during this period, Melanie Gibb claims that she just wasn't putting two and two together, and she just wasn't aware what was going on at the time. But she did admit that she thought Lori was lying. I'm not quite certain where to put this, so I want to make sure I do mention it at least a few times that Melanie Boudreau is supposed to come up there. She's invited by Lori to come up and give the area a try and check it out. And remember this, that Melanie Boudreau's father had to leave her mother when she was little quickly and in secret. And Melanie Boudreau was not in Lori or Alex's life for a long time, but suddenly she's very close with the two. In an interview, Melanie Gibbs says that she loves Melanie Boudreau and that she was talking to her on the phone quite often and that she was going through a lot of drama during her divorce with Brandon. This relationship only fuels the oddness. Now, during this time when everybody's gathering to Idaho, Lori's friends have been contacted by Lori and they're starting to gain question marks above their head. And one of those friends, her name is April Raymond. She lives in Hawaii and she was friends with Lori before all this started happening, and she watched everything unfold on the media. But she also had a first-hand experience with Lori. In fact, Lori flew to Hawaii in an attempt to try to recruit her for the $144,000 in the firstborn, furthering the idea that possibly Melanie Gibb going up to Idaho, Melanie Boudreau, Alex Cox, and Zuluma, all these people were gathering for something special. According to April, when Lori lived in Hawaii, she said she was really fun to be around, really positive, full of energy, full of life, and really nice to her and her boys. She said that Lori had talked to her about end times and invited Raymond to one of Lori's religious group meetings, but she says she declined. She says, quote, "I know they were doing a lot of meetings and she invited me to some of them, but I just didn't have any interest in participating in any way," end quote. April said that she really had a lot of feelings, for the Vallow family, including Charles. During that visit, Lori has Tylee with her, and Lori tells April that her and Charles had a fight. She told her that it would blow over, but she noticed Lori was very different. She was disorganized and manic. Lori tells her friend April that Charles had been having an affair and that he had turned mean and violent. But April said to her it just seemed like Lori was the one villainizing Charles. And Lori even told her how she sabotaged Charles' flight home by canceling the flight, and that she had taken his truck from the airport. So Lori is doing this way before Charles ever passed away, and she's telling April about Chad's books and podcast. Lori is glorifying everything that she is learning through this group and the group itself. A lot of people will hear the name Zuluma mentioned. She is part of this group, and we'll learn more about her shortly. But according to Lori, she's telling April about Zuluma and telling her that she has the ability to control the elements. She tries to explain to April that Zuluma has these powers, but April pretty much says that she calls it laughable. April just sat there listening to all Lori had to share, including Lori telling her about, the powers of each and every person involved with this 144,000 chosen ones. Reflecting back, April realizes now that Lori was there to recruit her or gather her for that 144,000. But April says that she did not believe herself to be one of those people. We're working our way back. We are still in September. And Melanie Gibb is there with her boyfriend. She's walked BYU with them, but now she is saying that she's seen some very odd behavior and some question marks that might contribute to one of the missing kids for herself. And so we learned that Charles might have died because Lori suspected him to be a zombie. This idea came from Chad. JJ was a zombie, according to Melanie Gibb, but we haven't heard Lori's side yet. But who else agreed that JJ was a zombie? And why did Lori call Tylee a zombie? Because Tylee didn't want to babysit JJ any longer. She was about to turn 18, And so she had other interests. This is why Lori told Tylee she was a zombie. At one point, while Melanie Gibb is visiting in Idaho, she's at Lori's house sitting in her living room. Let me remind you guys, this story is not easy to tell in order. We know that Melanie was sitting in that living room and she heard Lori talking about JJ and his possibilities of being a zombie, pointing out everything about him. But it's the last few days that really count. During Melanie Gibbs' last few days there, her and her boyfriend Warwick witnessed something that has stuck with her since that day. And we will cover this on part 3 coming up right after this.